The U.S. House of Representatives voted to impeach President Trump for the second time, an historical first. All this in response to last week's riot and incursion into the U.S. Capitol by Trump supporters that eventually claimed 5 lives, sadly. To discuss this, the fallout, and the road to unity, we're joined by Professor of Systematic Theology at the Catholic University of America, CHAD PECKNOLD, and Sohrab Ahmari. He's the op-ed editor at the New York Post. Gents, thank you both for being here. On Wednesday, House Democrats voted to impeach the president. Mostly all the Democrats went along, 10 Republicans. But Leader Mitch McConnell has said there is not enough time between now and the inauguration to conduct a Senate trial. Sohrab, first off, was this a good idea at this point, politically speaking? And what do you think the ramifications might be for Democrats and Republicans?
Well, thanks for having me, and it's rare to have one of your best friends as a co-panelist, so hello to Chad. Look, I think, let me stipulate that President Trump has not conducted himself well since the election. Terribly, especially in the last week, his refusal to initially call off the mob and so forth. I will stipulate all of that. But I still think, it can't look but vindictive that he's getting impeached with 7 days left to go in his term. So what is the point of that? I think for a lot of Trump supporters, and there are 75 million of them, 99.999% of whom did not do the disgraceful acts of besieging the Capitol and so forth. They're just patriotic Americans who agreed with the president's policies. Those people can't but see this combined with the big tech purge and everything else we've seen for the past week or so as an attempt to delegitimize them, and that their choices as political choices, voting for Trump, is somehow a stain on their character, and that Trump has to be just extirpated from the pages of history, which he won't be, but that's what they're trying to do. And so I don't think that will promote the kind of unity that Democrats claim to want going forward.
Yeah. Well, and the other question is, and I've spoken to a number of constitutional scholars and renowned lawyers, the Senate trial may not be able to be conducted after the inauguration. You can't impeach somebody once they've left office.
Right. And so if the point of Democrats, which I'm not crediting this as a point of view, but if their point is to move on from the Trump era, the fact that they're going to have a Trump trial potentially hanging over as a shadow, casting a shadow over, the first few months of the Biden administration, that doesn't seem to suggest them moving on. And the question is, what benefit will that bring them? I mean, my friend Tucker Carlson last night suggested that all that does is paper over the fact that the Democrats are intensely divided among themselves about how to move forward as a party, torn between various, far left and mainstream, quote unquote, left urges. What easier way than to continue the sort of Trump hatred that characterized the party over the past 4 or 5 years? So I think this is just an attempt to kind of extend nostalgia, the Trump era nostalgia, a bit longer, because it helped to unify Democrats in a way that nothing else would be able to going forward.
Yeah. They just can't give them up. Chad, at this point, I was amazed that President-elect Biden tweeted vague support for this impeachment move, saying, well, you can do this, but make sure my agenda moves as well. Is this revenge or justice at this point? And what effect does this have on Biden's call for unity and to not see a red and blue America?
Well, it's clearly an act of revenge by the Democrats. But as Sohrab says, it's also their only kind of pitch for unity is to be united around hatred of Donald J. Trump. And I think what you see here is, I drove into the studio in D.C. today, and it's like a militarized zone. If a Trump inauguration was being prepared for in this way, they'd call him a military dictator. The only thing that Biden is prepared for, it seems, is to be the anti-Trump figure. And this is not a cause for national unity at all. America has never been united around political leaders, or they've never been united around their distaste for political leaders. They've been united as a people because of their common loves, because they privilege the family, the community, the worker. These are the things that unite America. Above all, God. A one nation under God. This is what brings unity to America, not a second Catholic president, in scare quotes, and not an emergency power president who acted badly sometimes. Our unity is going to be found in the really fundamental truths of what it means to be Americans.
Mm-hmm. The predicate for all of this, we should say, was the idea that Trump incited the violence at the Capitol. I want to play for you both some prominent Pols reacting to the BLM and Antifa riots we saw over the summer. Watch.
The building just collapsed in the midsection, and you hear even some cheers of people.
It's ebbs and flows of violence and looting.
This is a movement, I'm telling you. They're not going to stop. And everyone beware, because they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
I don't care that much about statues.
Shouldn't that be done by a commission or the city council, not a mob in the middle of the night throwing it into the harbor?
People will do what they do.
Now, here are those same politicians reacting to the violence at the Capitol.
USA! USA! USA!
We witnessed two systems of justice. When we saw one that let extremists storm the United States Capitol, and another that released tear gas on peaceful protesters last summer.
This was an attack led and coordinated by white supremacists. It was a violent mob, an attempted coup to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power.
There are people in our country led by this president, for the moment, who have chosen their whiteness over democracy.
Sohrab, your take on this. I mean, is the violence and destruction of federal property only wrong when it's committed by ideological opponents? I never heard the word extremism uttered all summer.
Hey, Raymond, I just as you played that, I'm struggling to, I don't know, laugh or cry or whatever the reaction is to that, because that's such astonishing gaslighting. They don't even pretend to try to hide it, right? Because I live in New York City. I happen to remember vividly what I witnessed the night of June 1st and June 2nd in this city. I saw, directly with my own eyes, I saw protesters rampaging down Lexington Avenue, smashing any store, and the cops were too overwhelmed to even begin to respond. I saw them, scouting out my own apartment building as they were going up and down and smashing things. I saw, quote unquote, peaceful protesters running over cops in the Bronx, over officers, beating up officers, and then nationwide, the days-long, months-long assault on a federal courthouse in Portland, the autonomous, quote-unquote, zone in Seattle, all of that. Now, you can say that this was uniquely heinous what happened last week because it targeted the seat of American democracy as opposed to just private property, as opposed to just a Macy's in Herald Square or a courthouse in Oregon. But there's no denying the fact that for about a year, protesters were told essentially that if you show violence, you can get your political goals. City councils, blue mayors and blue governors will defund the police, and political violence works in a way. And we condemn that consistently, just as we, as the New York Post, but also I individually condemned what happened last week. But those who excused, winked at, denied, and even apologized for the events of last year, as you just pointed out in your montage clip, they have no standing to unequivocally condemn what happened, because they told one segment of society that political violence, as long as your cause is just. And again, the gaslighting makes me, I don't know, cry, laugh, be enraged. I can't quite describe the emotion because they're the way you're being morally lied to.
Chad, the thing that enrages me most is violence is always wrong. Using violence as a means of protest is always wrong. We had state capitals occupied over the summer and siege. Now we have the U.S. Capitol. Your thoughts on what this says to our children when they see the politicians excusing one form of heinous violence while condemning and calling the other Nazis and the Klan in action?
I think it tells our children who's in power. You know, our friend at Harvard Law School, Adrian Vermeule, says it's not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. It's an attempt to demonstrate for all of us Americans who is in charge, who has the power to use coercive force. And all summer long, we were told that a certain kind of political ideology could use any kind of force it wanted. It could contravene any laws it wanted with the permission of those who hold high office. But anyone who engaged in any kind of foul language, misrepresentation, or indeed violence was deemed as someone who does not even deserve to live in the country anymore, someone who should be extradited, deprived of their livelihood. What it all communicates is who has power. Now, that's the kind of order that you see in totalitarian regimes. That's not a democratic republic in which you have a give and take between citizens, in which you respect your neighbor. Even if you disagree, you respect your neighbor's dignity. And I think what it communicates to our kids is that we don't have a republic, that America is in crisis, and that their future is uncertain.
No, it's deeply troubling. It's deeply troubling, and we have to find a way back here. I guess one of the most disturbing things, I get politicians and ideologues trying to use this crisis to broad brush and brand their political opponents and try to take them down. Understood. But now that has metastasized and spread throughout American life. Now we have a handful of liberal Catholic media organizations, Catholic organizations, that have chosen to brand people in the Catholic community, brothers and sisters in faith, for, quote, culpability in last week's insurrection, saying that mostly conservative Catholics have blood on their hands. Some included in the list are former Attorney General William Barr, Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, Catholic League President Bill Donahue, Abby Johnson, the pro-life advocate, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, Cardinal Raymond Burke, Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, several Catholic priests, Catholic media organizations, even yours truly made the list. I mean, last time I checked, Amy Coney Barrett wasn't, inciting people to storm Capitol Hill. Maybe I missed that. Sohrab, first your take on this and this decision to demonize fellow Catholics for political purposes. What's going on here?
I mean, it's not it's predictable, unfortunately, that the polarization that rips our society, unfortunately, touches the church as well. When just one of the names that you picked out, I mean, I know, Raymond, you're not an insider, and we're friends. But, when I hear about Cardinals Burke and Dolan, those are both honorable churchmen, and I especially want to talk about Cardinal Dolan because he happens to be my shepherd here in New York. His Eminence has been, nothing but calm in response to desecrations against St. Patrick's Cathedral by, quote unquote, Black Lives Matter activists and Antifa types. Right. Time and again, he wrote an op-ed for us in the New York Post where he said, I remember Dagger John, my predecessor of blessed memory, the Archbishop John Hughes, how he would respond to mob violence against Catholics by know-nothings in the 19th century. But that's not the path I'm taking. I'm taking the path of reason, which the church has always championed, unabashedly. And so, to throw all these names together and to attempt to somehow tie anyone who expressed the conservative point of view, or in the case of the Cardinals, just the church's point of view, the church's perennial teaching, and frame that as somehow culpable and related to this, is just more of the same gaslighting that we talked earlier about in the show.
Chad, these people seem to prize ideology above doctrine or belief, and they're incensed that. And if you read the follow-on to these calls to censure and get rid of these people from public life, they really take issue with innocent human life being a preeminent issue for the church. This is a constant theme here. What should be the approach here? What is really happening, Chad?
Well, I think on one level we have to recognize that this is why the church continually makes appeals to the common good and to build up societies, because if we don't have a good society that the church can work with, we'll have a society that is working at cross purposes with the church. And I think what we have is a number of Catholics, prominent Catholics in major cities, who have been compromised by woke ideology. And they have put that power ahead of the truth of the Catholic Church. And they want the truth of the Catholic Church to bend to meet the power that be it. And this is a kind of upside down order. Now, nature can tolerate an upside down order for a while, but it doesn't tolerate it for very long. And I think we're going to see a kind of reaction to that, which is very dangerous. I think this is a very, very dangerous for prominent Catholic liberals to stand up and make the church into this plaything, this political plaything to serve woke interests.
I agree. No, well, the hit lists I found particularly disturbing. And Sohrab, when Trump came into power, there were no attempts to liquidate opposing voices, certainly not within the Catholic community. So my sense of this is we're moving into a really dark place where even faith, politics has been allowed to take the place of God in many ways in some of these people's minds. And that I find most disturbing. They use the faith as a political weapon, and it can't be that way. Look, people can disagree, you can vote how you want, but the truth is eternal. The truth doesn't move.
Yes, but the truth can be repressed. As Chad alluded to, the truth can be repressed for some time. It can never be eternally repressed, but it can be disguised, obfuscated, and censored. And so I just want to briefly mention this factor, which is that we haven't talked about, is all of this is happening against the backdrop of massive technologically empowered censorship, the likes of which we haven't seen in the history of this country before. The sort of searing event of the past few months for me is neither the election nor the upheaval at Capitol Hill, but the fact that we at the New York Post had reported an accurate story. Everyone now acknowledges that it was an accurate story about the president-elect's son and his corrupt dealings with essentially foreign powers, and Twitter and Facebook managed to just disappear that from vast swaths of the internet. And we were the tip of the spear. We bore the brunt of that, and we were banned for days. And then eventually they relented. But then after the election, especially the last week, they've widened the scope of who gets to be purged. And so, I think all of this is, you're right, is just taking us in a very dark place. I absolutely want to ditto Chad's allusion to our friend Adrian's motto in a way, that don't call it hypocrisy. It gets tiresome to use the word hypocrisy. It's a real hierarchy. They're just sort of, because violence, disgusting rhetoric, you can find it on Twitter all over. It's only certain kinds certain kinds of viewpoints that get targeted, and that's the hierarchy. And the sooner we wise up to that, the sooner at least we can deal with reality instead of pretending like this is the same old world of the 1990s or early 2000s.
No, and it's funny. Twitter's going to protect the republic from the president of the United States, but there's no presumption to protect the American people from China, Iran. These official organs continue to operate on Twitter and Facebook as if it's just another day and there's no problem at all. It's an unbelievable moment we've reached, and they have way too much power. They should be broken up, and I hope that movement, looks like there's a bipartisan movement to break up these monopolies. They should be broken up. Chad, what do you think lies ahead for the Catholic Church? and Catholics under a Biden administration? And before I get your answer, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York had this to say about President-elect Biden earlier this week. He said, "Our new president, who speaks with admirable sensitivity about protecting the rights of the weakest and most threatened, ran on a platform avidly supporting this gruesome capital punishment for innocent preborn babies." Your thoughts?
Well, that, of course, is a very savvy comment from His Eminence. Of course, this is what's going to have to be our modus operandi as Catholics, is utilizing one point of agreement to force a conversation about a point of real disagreement. So there's a kind of a shared assumption about the death penalty. Liberals are against the death penalty. The Holy Father has taught us about the impermissibility of the death penalty, and Cardinal Dolan, I think, very smartly said, "Well, we have the death penalty in this country under the widespread practice of abortion," and I think that's going to have to be our modus operandi. Unfortunately, is to show how one aspect of the liberal ideology agrees with the Church's teaching, and that aspect is in contradistinction and disagreement with an even more fundamental truth, that we protect human dignity itself in the womb at the beginning. So I think that's the right strategy. I think the weakness is a tendency to try to be a both-and kind of Catholic, in which you say, well, the Catholic Church is neither liberal nor conservative. That's true. But there's a kind of, speaking of hierarchy, there's a kind of hierarchy to the truths that we have to argue for. And so I think the bishops are right to stress that what we are fighting for now and always is the human dignity in the womb, and to say that that is actually more important than what we have to say about the very minor numbers of cases where you actually see the death penalty against, say, 2,000 lives lost in the womb every day in America. So I think that's going to have to be our highest priority going forward. I think we're going to have to tolerate, to some extent, this constant flouting of our second Catholic president. Second Catholic president happens to be the most pro-abort president in history. And we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to deal with the confusion that comes from that. We're going to have to deal with priests and bishops who don't pay attention to that fact, and that's going to be difficult for the Church in America.
Oh, I only have a moment left. I'm going to give each of you a shot at this. What can we do at this moment to unify the country in the midst of this viciousness, the violence we've seen? How do we bring Americans back together beyond the hateful politics that we're surrounded in? Sohrab, you very quickly.
I will just say that, I mean, it's cliche in some ways to say that on EWTN, but it's also an absolute unshakable truth, which is that we have to believe in the power of prayer. We really do. And I say that first foremost for myself, to pray more, to pray more, more, more.
All right. Chad?
Yeah,
last word.
Pope Leo XIII said that that the Catholic Church will give America her best citizens, and I think Sohrab's point is right, that her best citizens are those who pray and who point to God, who's the source of unity. This is what America really needs. It doesn't need to be pointed to a politician, it needs to be pointed to God.
I agree. No, we've got to get past politics and to the things that truly unite us: God, family, and one another. Thank you both for being here. You can find Sohrab Ahmari's columns and all the great op-eds over there at the New York Post at nypost.com. And you can follow CUA Professor CHAD PECKNOLD at CPecknold. Thank you both.
Thanks a lot.